Hi everyone, and welcome back to another Retronaut video. I am trapped at this moment behind a bit of a wall in front of me, a cardboard box, and what's in this box is actually going to be used in this video, because this video is actually about a device called the FujiNet. Let me put this, actually let me just slide this to the side a little bit so you can see me. So the FujiNet is, well, it's a number of devices actually. It's a disk emulator. It also gets your computer Wi-Fi. It also allows you to print, and it does other things as well. This isn't going to be an exhaustive review of the FujiNet, because the FujiNet's actually been around for a while. I'm just using it as more of a sort of excuse really to show a new machine on the channel, and also an entire new range of computers that we haven't actually shown before. I think if you watch this channel, you might get the idea that it's an Amiga-centric channel, and it isn't. It's just that I have a number of Amigas and I've been working on them recently, and that's why a lot of the content has been Amiga-centric. But I do like pretty much all the old retro tech. Yeah, I just want you to know that I'm not fixated on Amigas. I do like lots of different technology. So what actually is inside this box? Well, if I turn it towards the camera, you'll get an idea of what it is. So hopefully you can see it there. It says an Atari 800 XL outfit with disk drive and software. When I got this, it didn't have the software. That was obviously long gone. But what was amazing when I bought this from eBay was that I actually got the original box that the entire outfit came in, as well as its contents. And the contents are actually in really good condition as well, considering their age. Now, the Atari 800 XL is not the first computer in the 8-bit range of Ataris. That's actually what it is. It's one of the 8-bit Atari computers. When I was doing the research for this video, I actually got sucked into such a massive rabbit hole about Atari and the origins of Atari, you know, Nolan Bushnell and the VCS and all of that. And it's absolutely fascinating. And, you know, I was thinking about doing a kind of more in-depth sort of review of the 8-bit range of computers. But the thing is, this is kind of, for me, the high point of the Atari 8-bit range of computers. I know that there were computers after it, but I think this is kind of like the pinnacle of that range. And it came a few years after the launch of the machines back in the late 70s. And to tell the story fully, you really do need those original machines. You either need an Atari 400 or an 800. An 800 would probably be the best machine to own because it has a better keyboard. But they both have very particular engineering features that are very particular to that time and the circumstance that Atari found themselves in. And I think it's really fascinating why the machine wasn't, for instance, as successful as the Commodore 64 overall over time. And I think it's to do with the time that it came out and certain events that happened around that time that kind of hindered its success. But we're not going to go into that in this video. So let's get these devices out of the main box. So the first thing here, we have the Atari 800 XL itself in its original box, which is actually, as you can see, in fantastic condition. So I'll just lie that down here. And then inside this box is an Atari. Oh, actually, this is pretty heavy. Actually heavier than the computer. This might be tricky to get out. There's a bit of suction going on there. Put that there. And there's not much more inside here, actually. Let's have a look inside here. Yeah, that's about it. I have to obviously get the FujiNet to show you. What am I going to put this? There we go. Got that big box out of the way. So yes, you have the 1050 disk drive. I believe that I've retrobrighted this and I've tested it and it does actually work. I do have some original Atari floppy disks, the 8-bit range floppy disks. And the reason for that is I have a number of Infocom games, and quite a few of those actually turned out to be Atari versions of those Infocom games. So I actually took advantage of those and tested some of those out on this drive, and it does actually work. But the FujiNet that we're going to look at today is actually a direct replacement for this. This is obviously still useful, and I think it's a wonderful artifact. And honestly, the box is just in such amazing condition, and that was one of the reasons why I bought this. I'm not exactly a box fetishist, but I do like to see machines in their original packaging, so you get the sort of emotion and the feeling that people got when they first received their computers back in the 80s. And I've got to say, I'm a big fan of the Atari graphics. I think it looks really classy. It's quite an expensive method, actually. This is called a spot print, and they've used a metallic ink to actually give this metallic sheen to the box. That's actually pretty expensive. And I would say that was one of the things that really defined these machines. They were definitely premium when they came out, and they actually had better build quality, I would say, than the Apple II and the other two computers that came out in 1977. They really were very, very well built, and because of that, they were pretty premium. But yeah, fantastic floppy drive, and that I'm sure will be turning up in future videos, but we're not going to focus on it in this one. So let me just put that out of the way carefully, making sure I don't damage that. And then obviously the main event, which is the Atari 800 XL. Yeah, I mean, I call this box the Happy Christmas box because I'm assuming that it was given to somebody on their birthday or on a Christmas or something like that. So let's just say it was a Christmas. And I know myself that when I got my Commodore 64, which I got through trading up. Actually, one of the things I traded up was an Atari VCS. Then I traded up to a Dragon 32. That had a failure, and the company went bankrupt, and I managed to get a refund, which was amazing. And I managed to get my Commodore 64. Now, it took a couple of years before then I could get enough money together to buy my own floppy disk drive. And when I did, that really accelerated the use of that machine. It took it to a whole new level. And I had my own Happy Christmas. But that was a very happy year when I got my floppy drive and a number of games. So I've got a lot of empathy for the person that opened that box up there and found inside not only an Atari 800 XL, but also a floppy drive with it as well. Must have been a very happy day. So let's open it up. I've actually put a little bit of tape on this box because it has aged a little bit, which is not really that surprising considering how old it is. And I've just done put the tape on it to try and hold it together a bit better. You know, it's on the flaps here, which obviously they get worn every time you take the machine out. So hopefully soon I'll have some place to put this on a more sort of permanent display. And then I won't have to keep on, taking it out of its box. And maybe I can put this box on a shelf or something as a display item. Because right now, as I said, I don't really want to be taking the machine out of the box every couple of days or so. So let's take off the polystyrene as well, which also is in amazing condition. And it says inside here, Atari 800 XL DOM. I don't know what DOM means. Now, I've actually already taken the power supply out of here, and it's on the floor next to me because it's quite a heavy item, and I didn't want to carry that around as well. What we've actually got in the box here is the Atari 800 XL itself. Let me take that out. It's a little bit slippy. It's in a plastic bag. Why have I got it in a plastic bag? I think it came in a plastic bag, actually. So I'm just carrying on the packaging that it came with. Yeah, so let's take that out. And there's actually the remnants on here of a plastic protectorant that I use, aerospace protectorant, because I find that actually keeps the plastics in good condition. But it actually doesn't dry over quite long periods of time, which is quite interesting. This is actually the main event. This is the FujiNet. A really, really interesting device. And we'll show you how that works shortly. And here we have the video cable. And I'm not quite sure, but I think I actually might have made this cable myself, possibly. Let's have a look here. It's got my own label on it. It says Atari 800 on this, Chroma and Luma. So I think I actually made this myself. And this actually gets you the equivalent of S-Video, which is a better video standard from back in the 80s and 90s. More typical, actually, of machines from the late 80s and early 90s, S-Video. There were a number of different ways that you could get a signal from a machine like this onto a television. There is, I think is it a composite out, I think, that comes out here. That could then go into an RF modulator. that would then produce an RF signal, which is radio frequency signal, and that could then go into a television of the era. That was the standard connector for televisions back in the day. Alternatively, I believe there's a monitor port as well, and that's what this plugs into. And that would give you a better quality composite signal, I think it was. But it actually turns out that with a small mod, I think you can actually get S-video to this machine. And I've actually done that mod. I took this machine apart. I've actually refurbished this machine. When I got it, it was actually a little bit yellowed, but now it's actually in pretty much mint condition. I think you'll agree. The buttons here are in great condition. They're a little bit wonky, but I think that's normal with this machine. I don't think these were ever perfectly aligned. The keyboard is in good condition. The label is fantastic. I actually took all the plastics completely apart so I could separate the cream plastics from the brown. I think it actually still, there's a bit of a mark here actually where I protected the label by putting some sellotape over it to protect it when it was immersed in bleach to do the retro brighting. And it survived pretty well. There's a little bit of blurring here on the label, but it's basically in pretty good condition. Hopefully you can see that there. Has a bit of a smell about it. Obviously it was stored in a loft or something for a very long time, and it has that lofty, storagey smell about it. And I've heard people say that if you wash electronics in like an ultrasound cleaner, you can actually get rid of that smell, which would be quite nice because it definitely has a kind of slightly musty smell about it. I cleaned the flaps as well. There's a little bit of oxidization on them. I think actually it might be from where there's a plastic coating on them that seems to have got a little bit chipped. But yeah, basically the machine is in mint condition. The floppy disk drive is also in this condition as well. I've renovated that as well, so it looks a perfect match for this machine. So yeah, let's have a look at the machine. I probably need my glasses here to read the labels on the back so I don't get the ports wrong. Yeah, that's going to help. So what do we have on the machine? It's basically the inheritor of the Atari VCS system. As I said, I'll probably one day do an in-depth series on this machine and how it came about. Not this machine in particular, because this was a later version of the Atari 800. But it was absolutely the inheritor of the crown of a video gaming system from Atari. Atari created the Atari VCS console back in the 1970s. It was a massive smash hit worldwide, and it actually catapulted video gaming into the mainstream. So we all owe Atari a massive debt of gratitude, because they were the company, more than any other company, I think, that really propelled video gaming into the home. Around that time as well, there were a lot of arcade games as well. Those are also pushing video gaming in general. And obviously Atari was instrumental in that as well. So not only were they in the arcades, but they also by, I think it was 1977, were in the home as well with the Atari VCS. They needed to produce a new machine. They knew the VCS wouldn't last forever in popularity. So they decided to produce a console, and that over time morphed into a console and a computer, and then eventually that became a computer, two computers I should say, the Atari 400, which was meant to be the cheaper one, more aimed at children, and then the Atari 800, which was the more expensive, more capable machine. Now, this machine is a later version of the Atari 800. The Atari 800 was expandable, it could have more RAM put in it, but this machine already has the maximum RAM that machine could actually have. So this has got 64K of RAM in it, which would make it pretty much competitive with the Commodore 64. Doesn't have quite as good sound as the Commodore 64. The processor, I believe, is pretty much the same. The graphics are pretty close. They're pretty much on par with the Commodore 64. Maybe the 64 has a slight edge, but not much. And one of the other claims to fame of this machine as well is that it was another computer that Jay Miner actually worked on, and another engineer called Joe Decker. And they were both legends actually in video gaming in terms of engineering, because both of them did amazing work on early computers for the home. Yeah, Joe and Jay were very instrumental in getting the Atari VCS. And both of them as well were extremely influential in actually making the Atari 800, with Jay, I think, working on the graphics and Joe working on the serial port, which is a little masterpiece in itself that this device actually takes advantage of. I didn't actually own one of these back in the day. I really, really lusted after, I think it was an Atari 400 at first. And although people these days tend to mock its keyboard, the design of that machine, I personally think, was just wonderful. Had a sort of Aztec temple kind of look to it. Looked like a sort of an Aztec ziggurat, you know? And I thought the keyboard looked really sort of techno. I never actually used one, which is probably why I thought it looked techno, because most people say it's pretty awful. You know, those membrane keyboards, generally, they're not tactile, they're hard to press, and over time they obviously get damaged, and they tend to break quite easily as well. However, at the time, that was something which was behind a glass cabinet in Woolworths, which was a store which has actually gone from here in the UK, and fondly remembered because it was a shop which was a sort of everything shop, a kind of working class department store, if I can put it like that. It had lots of things in it, but the local Woolworths, at least in our area, had a really great display case, glass fronted, with some really great machines in it. I remember the Texas Instrument machines being in there, the ColecoVision, the Atari 400, maybe the Atari 800. I'm not quite sure if I can remember that one. Didn't, for some reason, have a Commodore 64 in it. Not that I remember. Maybe I stopped going to that particular case at some point. It was a bit of a shrine for me in the late 70s anyway. So yeah, on the back of the machine, you've got a thing that says the peripheral port. Now, internally, this was called the SIO port. I'm not quite sure what SIO is. Is it serial in and out? Not quite sure. I'll look that up. But that is a major feature of the Atari in the way that it was designed. And Joe Decker went on in the later part of his career to actually be very influential in the design of USB serial ports, which is pretty amazing. And to this day, he says that the origins of that concept, that design, actually comes from the Atari 400 and 800 machines, which is amazing because they were actually conceived of and designed in the 1970s. And I believe him, actually. I've read up what, how that port was designed and the reasons for it being designed. And I think it is actually the direct ancestor of USB devices. Now, because it has that port and it has a very unique design, which means you can daisy chain devices plugged into that port, the machine doesn't really have that many other expansions on the back. It doesn't have a sort of standard serial connector. It does have a parallel bus. So you've got the peripheral port, then you've got the parallel port, then you've got the monitor port, which, as I said, could be used with a suitable monitor from the era. Would have been probably less likely, although for an Atari 800, yeah, maybe people would have got monitors. But for the 400 in particular, it would have been the TV connector on the back here that actually would have been the one that most people used in conjunction with a modulator to actually then get that to work on the TV. To the right of that connector, you've then got the power in, which is DC. And then you've got a rocker switch, which is the power. Then on the right-hand side of the machine, you've got two joystick ports, and they are direct ancestors of the joystick port design, which was introduced by Atari on the VCS system. And that became sort of a standard, really, on many, many computers. Not all computers used them in the era, but it was very common for computers to use that connector because it had this direct compatibility with Atari joysticks and paddles. And that meant you could basically inherit all the peripherals that Atari had made for its machine back in the 1970s and early 80s. So anyway, that's enough of a general overview of the machine. As I said, very attractive machine, but we're not here to talk about its looks. We're here to talk about this, I was going to call it a cartridge. It's not really a cartridge, it's a device. So yeah, this is the FujiNet, and it has been developed over the last few years. And what we're going to do now is we're going to go through what this device actually brings to your Atari 800. But before we do that, let's have a quick word from our sponsor, PCBWay. PCBWay, where you can make your tech dreams a reality. And it's hard to believe, but PCBWay has been with us now for 10 years with an ever-expanding range of services to meet your needs. A personal favourite of mine is their PCB project service. Just pick a project, including gems such as the Sidekick 64, and PCBWay can do the rest, delivering just the PCBs or the fully assembled boards straight to your door. The choice is yours. PCBWay really is a one-stop solution because whether it's PCB prototyping, PCB assembly, 3D printing, or even CNC machining, PCBWay is the way. Starting with an instant quote for your PCB projects, PCBWay will leap into action, building your PCB, assembling it for you if you wish, and once it's passed their quality tests, it'll be winging its way to you in a flash. PCBWay, PCB prototyping the easy way. So this is the FujiNet device, and as you can see, it has a number of features on it, and we'll just go through these quickly. Number one, it has a connector to connect it to the SIO port on the Atari 800, and actually on the back of it, it has a male connector which then allows you to connect other SIO devices through it. So as I mentioned earlier, it does daisy chaining, and that allows us to still allow that to happen, which is really cool. Then on this side, you've got the micro SD slot, and I currently have a card in there. I think it takes cards which are, well, you're advised to use cards which are less than 32 gigabytes, I think it is. And when you think about typical games on this machine being 64K, that's just a huge amount of data. So a card of about 4 gigabytes would be perfectly fine for this device. On the other side, you have a, I think it's, is it a mini USB port or micro? Not quite sure which of the two it is. And that's used for flashing the device. And then next to it, you have a power switch on and off, which I guess you might use one every now and again if you've got some kind of conflict with something for some reason, like a cartridge maybe, something like that. On the front of it, I've actually put some labels, and that's just to remind me what everything is here. So top left, you've got the disk swap button. I've used a dot there to show that it's actually a short press to swap the disk. And underneath it, I've got a dash, which is that if it's a long press, it will turn on Bluetooth. And this is the actual Bluetooth LED here. Then you've got the B button. I'm not sure what else it does, but I know that it's used to reset the device. So I've got that down here, a long press. And you have to hold that down and then turn on the machine to give it power. And that will actually reset, completely reset the FujiNet. So you've got to be careful with that one. You don't want to do that by accident once you've got it set up. And then on the right-hand side, you've got a reset button here, and I'm assuming that's a quick reset. Then you've got these LEDs here underneath. They're actually in quite small little holes. I think it would have been nicer if these could have been larger, maybe, and a little bit more prominent. But anyway, they do work. So on the left-hand side, you've got the Wi-Fi activity light. Then you've got the Bluetooth light, which I believe isn't used very often, so mostly that will be off. And then on the right-hand side, you've got an orange light here, and that's the SIO. So that's the serial input-output device activity light. So that's the basics of the device. This obviously then has to be plugged into the rear port of the Atari 800 and then set up. So let's do that now. So on the back of the machine, there's the SIO port as we showed you earlier. Here's the device, and it just simply plugs into there. So I'm just going to put that in carefully. There we are. And as I said, there's the port on the back, which allows you to daisy chain it with any other SIO using the devices that you may have for your 800. Right, next we'll turn on the machine and we'll set the FujiNet so that we can actually set it up and show you how it works. So the first thing we'll do is turn on the machine and we'll just let it boot up. There we are, there's the FujiNet starting up. And right now I've already partially got this set up. I was testing it earlier. So what we'll do is we'll actually wipe out this configuration so we can start again, so I can show you how it works, okay? So to do that, I need to hold down the B button and then turn the machine on. So let's turn it off. I'll just hold down the button, turn the machine on. This should actually then reset the FujiNet. There we go. Welcome to FujiNet. And what we need to do now is actually set up our Wi-Fi. I've obscured some Wi-Fi SIDs here because obviously I don't want to share those with the public. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually select one of these and then type in my password to get this set up. So let's go down to the SID that I want to use. Press enter. And now I need to type in the password. And then once you've typed it in, press enter. And it should now try and connect to that network. There you go. Once it's connected, you'll go back to the host list and the drive slots. So the way this works is that the host list at the top is a selection of sources that you can get files from. And then below, you've got the drive slots, and those are emulated physical disk drives. And as you can see, you've got a lot of them. You've got 8 that you can actually put disks into. So the advantage of that is that if you have a multi-disc game, something like the Ultima games or something like that, you can actually put one disk in disk 1, another disk in disk 2, and then you can use the button here to swap between those disks. You just do a quick press on this, and it will actually cycle those disks. When it cycles, disk 2 will become disk 1 will become 2. Obviously, if you have more, it will cycle and each one will pop up into the next slot above it. So the first thing we need to do is get it set up so we can actually access the SD card, which is plugged in here. I believe it's formatted with FAT32. All you have to do is put folders on there and put your games in there. I think ATR files are the most common format that this actually supports. But anyway, let's just get it working. So we need to use the menu at the bottom of the screen to work out what we want to do. We want to edit. So we're already on slot 1, so we want to press E for edit. And now I'm in edit mode, and I can just type in SD. And if I press enter, or rather return, that's now set up to access the SD card on the FujiNet. So if I press enter, I can actually go and look at the contents of the SD card. And you can see I've got it set up with FujiNet folder and then a games folder. So if we use the arrow keys to navigate down and press return to enter that folder, you have a bunch of games. Now, I found it a bit of a pain because there's lots of different formats of games that you can get on the Atari 800. As I said, ATR files are the ones which seem to be supported by this. I may be wrong about that. But I did find there was one set of games that you can get called Games 1A. I'm not sure where these came from. I actually found these on another channel, and I'll give you a link to where I got this from. This is fantastic because what it is, even though it's just a single file, it seems to be a library of many games. So if I press return on that, what it's asking me to do now is which disk drive slot do I want to put it into? So I'm going to say, let's put it into slot 1. So I'm going to press return. When you do that, you now have the option of choosing whether it's a read-only disk or if it's a read-write disk, which is important because some games wrote data to the disks while you were playing them. So you need to work out if that's the case. And if you're finding that a game doesn't work and it's complaining about it, needs write access, then you would obviously have to go back and set up the floppy disk emulation to be read-write. Most of the time, though, you can just press return because most games it's going to be read-only. So press return. Now we're back in this directory. What I want to go now is back to the main menu. So I'm going to press escape to abort out of this. And now we're back in the main menu. So what else can we do in here? Well, we can actually set it up so that we have different hosts on the internet. Because we have Wi-Fi, we can type in host names, which are basically special servers, which actually then serve data in the correct format for the system to work with. And we'll do that shortly. And the other thing that you can do is actually you can set up one of those servers locally. Now, I've already got one of those set up on my PC. So what we'll do now is we'll actually set it up so we can access data on that. So I'm going to press there, press return. Actually press edit, sorry, not return, because we haven't actually set anything up yet. We can't actually go into it yet. So I'm going to put in 192.168.0.249. Now, obviously, that IP address would be the IP address on your network where you want to set up your server. There is software, I believe, to run the server on Mac OS, on Windows, and also on Linux. So you've got, as many choices as you want, really. I don't really have a great setup at home. I don't have any of those machines running, which would allow me to have that server running all the time. So unfortunately, I do have to turn on my Windows PC to actually get that server to run. And that server, once it's running, you can basically put files on it just like we did with the SD card. So the server isn't absolutely necessary, but it's one of the cool features of FujiNet. In fact, it is the feature that puts the net into the device, the fact that it is actually a networking device. But yeah, right now, that is now set up so we can actually access files on my PC. So what I'll do is I'll quickly turn on my PC and we'll have a look at that. Okay, that server's now running. So hopefully if we press enter, it should actually find it. Let's see what happens. Yes, it did. And what I've actually done is the file that I showed you being on the actually SD card, the Games 1A library, I've put it onto my server as well. And it should work in exactly the same way. So if we go down to here, press return. It's now going to ask us which slot we want to put it in. We'll say we'll put it in slot 1. And we're going to say it's going to be read-only again, so return again. Now we're set up. So all I need to do now to get this to actually boot up to use that device is, I believe, press the Option key and that will then reset the machine and load up that device. So let's give it a go. There we go. It's super quick. And what's fantastic is that this particular library has many, many games in it. So rather than, trawling the internet, trying to find all these different games and getting them in the correct format, this is a really good sort of jump start, really, in the world of the Atari 800. So I'm just going to pick something at random. Let's have a look in E. What's in there? Let's try and find something which I recognize. I recognize Eidolon, but actually, tell you what would be good. Let's go back. So how do I go back? Escape? Yes. Okay. Let's go for Donkey Kong, right? Because that's a known quantity. So let's go down to DO. We have Donkey Kong Arcade. Not sure what the difference is. Let's try Donkey Kong Arcade. You hear the very characteristic noises there. That's typical of the Atari 800 when it's running. And there we are. Donkey Kong Arcade is running. I need to press the start button. And I'm going to show you now just how bad I am at playing Donkey Kong. Get ready. How high can you get? Did it used to say, how high can you try? Okay. Come on, drop the hammer. No. I'm actually not that bad. Who would have known it? So far we've seen that we can get a file from our SD card. We can get it from a local server as well, this server here. And in fact, we actually got the Games1 ATR file from actually both of those sources. So it shows that the FujiNet is very flexible. Obviously, when we get something from one of the network sources, that's where the FujiNet, the net part of the net name comes in. It's a network device, and that's the really cool thing about it. So not only do you have access to files from your local storage on the SD card, but you also can get them from your network. What's really cool, though, is that that local server could potentially be exposed to the internet, right? If you've ever set up a server on the internet, you obviously have to get an IP address set up locally that is then visible externally, and you do that through your firewall. Once you've done that, you can then link that to a hosted name, a host name. So there is actually a host name out there for the FujiNet team, and it's called FujiNet Online. So what we can do is we can edit the slot and actually turn it into a link to that server. So if we press E for edit, we type in FujiNet.online, press return, we should now be able to access that server. So let's press return and see what happens. And bang, there we are, straight on the server. So we are actually now on the internet. We're not just using my local network, we're also using the internet to access files. So a very, very cool part of FujiNet is the ability to access files anywhere, really. And it's amazing when you think about it, that this is a machine that was released in 1979. It would have been architected, I suppose, from what, 77 onwards. So it's just amazing that this machine, with this modern equipment, can actually give you a usable experience on the internet. I mean, I'm not saying it's a web browser. It's not anything like that. But it is a usable text-based interface that's actually perfectly functional, and it allows you to get files. Now, one of the things you'll notice is there are a number of subfolders on here. Now, there's one for the Atom, which is another, I believe it was a computer, wasn't it, from Coleco? I think it was, Coleco Atom. We got the Apple II, which we've looked at in a previous video. Then you obviously got the Atari. It doesn't say Atari 8-bit, but I think it's limited to the Atari 8-bit machines. And then you've got CBM, which is the shortened version of Commodore. I believe they're working on a FujiNet for the Commodore machine. They're definitely working on for the Apple II. And those are devices which we'll have to have a look at in the future when we get hold of one. Because right now I don't have one. So yeah, let's stick with the Atari for now. So let's go into the Atari folder and see what's in it. And you can see there's a basic folder there, cassette, DOS. Now, I'm not going to dive into all of these. I mean, this is basically like, you know, the internet. So there could be loads and loads of things going on here. But for instance, if we were to go into the games folder, there would be a bunch of different games, obviously. So let's go in there. And as you can see, just like on my local server, you've got a bunch of different games there. And I think if you scroll down to the bottom of the page, you'll go to the next page. There we are. And I think you can use these arrow keys to go to the next page. Oh, actually, no. Looks like we've chosen to actually put that into a slot. So we could, if we wanted to now, put that game into a slot, choose it there, press enter. And now if we quit out of this, what we've actually done is, which is kind of crazy, we've actually set it up so that we're going to load Scorch XEX from the internet on an Atari 8-bit machine, which is kind of crazy. So all we'd have to do to load that is press Option, and then it would load that game. Now, I'm not really sure if that's going to work. Let's try another one. Let's go online again. And let's choose one a little bit more carefully this time. Let's go to Atari and Games. So let's try Boulder Dash. Let's try that, Boulder Dash 1. And put that in slot 1, read only. We'll quit out of there, pressing escape. And now, hopefully, if we press Option, it's loading up the game. Yep, Boulder Dash, amazing, huh? Love this game. Such a big fan of this game back in the day. Anyway, we're not here to play games right now. We're here to show off the FujiNet device. But as you can see, I actually loaded Boulder Dash, one of my favorite games back in the day, across the internet using the FujiNet. Fantastic, huh? It's just an amazing device. Where can we go from here? Well, you may notice if we actually go back to the FujiNet menu, or the FujiNet start screen, I should say. It's not really a menu. The screen that shows the different devices and so on. There isn't actually a configuration interface here. For that, there's actually a web interface. So what we're going to do next is we're going to go onto my Windows machine. Obviously, you can browse it from anywhere. You can use a Mac or whatever. And I'll show you the web interface for this device. Now, what's really cool about this device is, and this is one of the reasons why I didn't say specifically what it features at the beginning of this video, and that's because I know that it does disk emulation. I know that it does Wi-Fi, but it actually does a number of other things as well. I know that it can do print emulation as well through printing to PDFs, which is quite cool. But the FujiNet team, as you saw, they're working on new devices for other platforms. So they're also always updating this platform as well. So I updated my FujiNet device the other day, and I discovered that, in fact, there were a lot more features on it. So let's go over to the web interface now and have a look at the configuration utility and some of the other features on the device which are available right now, which is what, in August of 2024. But before I do that, there is one thing I do need to do, and that's actually to find out the IP address of my local server. The way I believe it works is that when you turn on the FujiNet, it will automatically configure itself, and using DHCP, it will actually give itself an IP address on the network. So you need to find that out. You can press the C key, so I'm just going to press C. And now we can see the config screen on the FujiNet itself. On there, what we're looking for is IP address. See, 192.168.0.30. Well, I would imagine that on your machine, it'll be a different number. Anyway, that's the IP address I need for my web server. So let's go and have a look at that. Okay, so I've typed in the IP address. You can see that at the top. And this is the FujiNet web interface. And it's interesting that they've gone this route. You know, you can actually configure it on the actual Atari 800 itself if you want to. But you can do a lot of the configuration from here as well, which is quite interesting. So top left, we've got the network configuration. And you can see there that it says the IP address is, as you can see, 192.168.0.30. Obviously not that useful in this interface because you need that IP address to get here in the first place. Anyway, all the network stuff is on the left-hand panel there, left top panel. Top right panel, you can see you've got the hardware information. Again, that's probably more useful to developers maybe. Then you've got the host list on the left-hand side, mount list on the right-hand side, the virtual printer, as you can see there, printer settings and modem settings. So you can actually print out from within an application that's running with FujiNet running, because FujiNet will actually mount a virtual printer and you can choose which printer here, you can see. So for instance, we might say Atari 820 printer. We could save that. And the user interface will update whenever you save anything. So that's now saved as my default printer. On the right-hand side, as you can see there, for modem, I've got use virtual modem. Yes, that's actually enabled. So if I was to use some comms, communications software on my Atari 800, I would actually be able to dial up using that virtual modem to a BBS, which is quite interesting, quite a funny thing to do in this day and age. I actually used to use BBSs back in the 1990s, just before I started actually experiencing the web. That was the point at which I really got a modem and actually started exploring it, which was interesting, just before it kind of became outmoded. And there are other devices further down the page and configuration panels, and I'll show you those in a second. But what I find interesting is you can actually interact with the FujiNet from here. So for instance, if I wanted to look in the SD folder, I can click on that. As you can see, there's the FujiNet folder and the games folder, so I can click on that. And let's say, for instance, I wanted to have a look at Mule. I could open that up, click on that. Now I've got the option to actually put it into one of my drive slots. So let's actually mount it as read-only in drive 2. And the user interface restarts. And as you can see, in drive 2, I've got Mule. I can't actually interact with this right now because I'm actually capturing this on my Mac and my PC isn't running. But if I were to click on that IP address, it would actually go to the same server that we saw earlier in the video. But FujiNet Online is still obviously online, so we can click on that. And there we are. We're in the same folder structure as you saw earlier. So let's go to Atari, and then we'll go to Games. And let's say we wanted to mount Spelunker. So click on that. We'll put that as a read-write disk in slot 3. Well, apparently it couldn't actually get that file. So let's try going back. Let's try reading it, putting as read. Okay, that was okay. Yeah, I guess that makes sense, doesn't it? Because what you're trying to do is mount a file on the internet as a read-write file, which doesn't make sense really, if you think about it. I mean, otherwise you could have multiple people writing to the same disk image across the internet. So yeah, what I did there didn't actually make sense. And I understand, of course, now why I did that. So you can see now we've got these 3 drives actually mounted, but you can actually eject them from here as well. There you go, it updates, and we'll eject Mule as well. Okay, so let's scroll further down the page and I'll show you some of the other settings. Now, I must admit, I don't understand what all of these do. Some of them are quite obvious, and other of them are a little bit more esoteric. I've spoken to the developers of the FujiNet, and they admitted that some of this stuff isn't documented yet. So yeah, it does seem to be a thing in the sort of retro community where people are producing new features, but it's actually quite a lot of work to document things. And to be fair, they've done a really great job, but it looks like they've let things slip a little bit on the documentation of this interface. I did have some of these features explained to me, but honestly, they're relatively esoteric. So we'll just focus here on the ones that I can either understand or which are really, quite obvious really. So HSIO, that is, I think, high-speed I/O settings. So you can actually go here and change the speed at which your SIO actually runs at. I haven't changed anything, so I'm assuming that this is the default 67 kilobytes a second. I assume that is, but you can actually increase it to double the speed. I'm assuming that if you did that, you're going to get faster load times. Don't know if that causes any compatibility problems, but it's interesting that you could do that. Let's actually try changing that, and I'll try that off camera later and see if that actually works. So let me just save that. On the right-hand side of the page, you've got your time zone. I know from experimentation that I'm UTC +1. You can actually choose from a list here. So you just choose your time zone like I did and then save it. UDP stream, not quite sure what that's for. I believe it's for a particular piece of software, but yeah, you got a configuration there. Program recorder, again, I'm not really sure what that's for. I'm assuming that you can use it to maybe create a disk image. I'm not sure really what it does, but it does say about having a pull down resistor. So I'm not really sure what that's all about. It does say use as a virtual program recorder. So that's interesting that you can actually maybe produce a virtual tape images, I guess. Then you've got, let me just scroll down a little bit, CPM settings. So it says here, use as a virtual CPM device. And then you've got PC Link, enable PC Link. I'm really not sure what that's for. And then you've got disk swap. This was a feature that I noticed was there before I actually did the firmware upgrade. So I think it's been a feature of FujiNet for a while now, but it is actually a relatively new feature. What that is it uses a speech emulation system on the Atari called SAM to actually speak when you change your disks. So as we saw earlier, the left button A, if you press it very quickly, it will actually swap your disks if you have multiple disks mounted. And every time you do that, it will actually say the name of the disk, which is the current disk, which is actually in the mount position. So if you rebooted with that disk, it would actually boot that disk. So that's quite an interesting little thing. And then on the right-hand side, you've got boot settings, enable config, set alternate config, boot disk, etc., etc. So yeah, it's really quite cool that you have this sort of parallel interface to actually interacting with the FujiNet. And what I think is quite interesting about it as well is that if you actually update your firmware and then load up this page, you actually get an inkling into some of the new features which have been added to the software, possibly even before they've been documented. So yeah, another interesting way of interacting with your FujiNet. So that was the FujiNet. And I think it's an amazing device to have with your Atari 800, whether it's the original 800 or a 400. I think it works in a 400 that's been expanded. Not quite sure about that. But it definitely obviously works in an 800 XL, and I'm assuming it would work in an original 800 model. It's a fantastic device. I mean, let's face it. When I first got my Commodore 64, for instance, I got an SD to IEC. That was a really great device at the time. And then when I got my Atari 800, the first thing I did actually was concentrate on renovating it because it was quite yellowed. But the Uvinator came into play and did a fantastic job again of retrobrighting this machine and getting it back to mint condition. And once I did that, I wanted to get some software. Now, the thing is, I didn't own an Atari 800 back in the 1980s. So I don't have the emotional connection that I have, for instance, with the Commodore 64 in terms of the games. So it's very hard to justify buying games for it these days because they cost a lot of money. It's very common for games to be a minimum of £30. And there are many, many people out there now who think they can get away with selling them for £200, £250 or more. It's gone crazy. So trying to get yourself a software library these days, especially if you own multiple platforms, is just a crazy expensive proposition. So the nice thing about this device is it allows you to get disk images and experience games on the platform without too much of an expense. Obviously, you have to buy the FujiNet. That's obviously an investment. But once you've got that, you can then obviously download software. What's really cool about it, of course, is that it's got the internet features as well. So you can obviously go to other servers, and that means that you can actually go to other people's curated software libraries. Maybe one day when I get maybe a permanent server, I could create a Retronaut FujiNet server, and then I could put my collection on games on there, the games that I think actually were the best on the Atari 800. It's interesting as well that it's an expanding device. It keeps on having new features added to it. And I also think it's really cool that it's now expanding to other platforms. So it's moving to the Apple II, Commodore 64. I'm a little bit worried that maybe they're spreading themselves a little bit too thin. But if it's one of those projects where there's a number of contributors from different platforms, then really it probably is just going to be a fantastic thing for the future. I will have to get myself an Apple II, one of these. And it looks like to use it on an Apple II, I'd actually need another expansion card for my Apple IIe. I think it would work out of the box on my Apple IIc, and it would also work on my 2GS. But obviously then I'd need 3 of them. Yeah, that's becoming a bit expensive, isn't it? Anyway, yeah, the Atari 800, fantastic machine. I would definitely recommend getting one of these, obviously with the FujiNet, so you can then explore the library. And I'm looking forward actually to exploring the software on this machine in more depth in the future. Talking about, earlier about the documentary that I like to do about Atari, I would definitely love to do that. I find it fascinating, the story about, Nolan Bushnell and the genesis of Atari, and then how they went on to create the VCS and then the 8-bit machines. And I think the 8-bit machine era is a fascinating story about why this machine could have been a world beater, but wasn't quite a world beater. And I think it was hampered by certain things that happened at the time, certain technological decisions that they had to make, and maybe also the time that they released the machine was an issue as well. Yeah, so I think that's a really interesting story to tell. Unfortunately, I don't have an Atari 400 or the original 800, and I really think I need those machines to tell the story, because it's it's the hardware of those machines that's a big part of that story. So if anybody out there wants to loan me those machines, ideally I would like to loan a 400 and 800. And if I can't get those, then I'll just have to wait. When funds are available, then I'll have to try and buy myself a 400 and 800. And I've checked online, and actually they're actually quite rare in the UK. Not sure if I want to buy one from the States, because obviously then you've got the power supply issues. But right now I'm finding that in the UK in particular, they're actually quite thin on the ground, those machines. So it might be quite hard to do that. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. And if you did, then please give the like button a click. Give the like button a hit if you could, please, because that will really help this video go out to other people who are interested in this kind of stuff. And if you did like this video and you haven't actually been to the channel before, then please click on the subscribe button. And if you do that, then please make sure you click on the bell button, because that will then give you a notification whenever I release any videos. And hopefully you will want to see more videos from us in the future. Anyway, hope you enjoyed the video, and until next time, take care.